Hey guys, tonight we begin a long, slow, slightly ridiculous journey across the Silk Road, not as a mighty merchant, not as a galloping diplomat, but as well just you, a very tired traveler who, for frankly, didn't realize that boredom might be the biggest danger in this whole expedition. You're not even past the first checkpoint, and already you're wondering, wait, how long exactly is this thing again? The answer: thousands of kilometers through desert on camel without ambience fi. Yes, boredom is real, and no, you can't skip to the next custom. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing this sleepy little map of the world light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight. Your eyes open to yellow. Not a gentle sunrise yellow, no. More like a cent minus, and then is your minus ETH. Same minus color, minus everywhere. Permanent minus filter kind of yellow. Welcome to the Taklam Desert. The air is dry with a faint sweetness, like someone overcooked a pot of mutton stew and tried to mask it with camel dung incense. There's no mistaking it, you're in Silk Road territory now. And the journey's just getting. You mount a camel. It groans like it's seen your riding skills before. You grip the saddle awkwardly, trying to look competent, while the camel judges you in slow blink. Around you, the caravan begins its crawl, and you immediately realize this is going to be so boring. Every camel step lands with thunk, thunk, thunk. It's like the world's slowest metronome. You start counting steps to pass time, and by the time you hit step 482, your brain has entered what experts call existential autopilot mode. Historians love to say the Silk Road was a vital artery of cultural exchange. You're beginning to think it was also the longest boredom endurance test in human history. The scenery, sand, then more sand, then an emotionally defeated bush that looks like it gave up trying to grow 10 years ago. You expected marvels, exotic bazaars, silk rustling in the wind. What you got was bait with wind. Other caravans pass you by Persians with shimmering robes, so GDIN traders with smug faces. No one talks. Everyone has the look of someone who's run out of small talk. Boredom starts to change your brain. You stare at your left boot for 15 minutes and think, if I mail just this boot to Samarkand, would it get there before I do? Some scholars believe Silk Road travelers composed poetry, studied the stars, or invented games to stay sharp. You, meanwhile, have invented a new hydration system. Flip your canteen upside down and watch the last drop of water fall like it's an ancient hourglass. When it runs out, you drink. Revolutionary. Academics still debate what really kept people going on the Silk Road. Was it faith, gold, or just a lack of better options? At night, the desert goes quiet, too quiet. You lie in your itchy blanket, listening to the wind hum like a badly tuned flute. You start to miss that annoying fly from earlier. It was something to do. You count stars. You imagine they're watching you back, pitying you a little. You start making up names for constellation. That's Regrettus Maximus. You mutter, pointing at a crooked one, named after my decision to join this caravan. You begin to understand the Silk Road's greatest danger, wasp bandits or sandstorms. It was slowly becoming someone who names stars for entertainment. The road goes on. Your feet are still sore. Your mind maybe even sore are. But there's a tiny flicker of determination in you now. Tomorrow, maybe you'll try to organize a game with the other travelers, or a talent show. You've got charisma. You could host. You wake up with a camel staring at you like it knows all your secrets. its breath smells like fermented grass and vague judgment. Around you, the camp is already stirring gruff voices, clinking gear, and that one guy who insists on humming the same 3- note tune every morning like it's a ritual to some unboredom. You dust off your blanket, stretch your back, and try to mentally prepare for another long day of walking and thinking and blinking. Welcome to the glamorous life of a silk-road traveler. But just as you're resigning yourself to another 12- our slow march, you notice something odd. A group clustered around a cart laughing. That's new. You edge closer and see what looks like a heated debate. Two merchants are dramatically reenacting a caravan mishap from last week. One flails his arms like reins. The other puffs his cheeks and makes P to EY sound. You have no idea what the joke is, but it's working. Everyone is wheezing. Turns out, in the crushing monotony of the Silk Road, entertainment is DIY, and travelers, especially those who've done this route more than once, have gotten creative. You meet a man named Abdurrahim who calls himself a story keeper, not a storyteller, mind you. A story keeper. He insists there's a difference. He claims he doesn't tell tales for fun, he preserves them. But somehow, every one of his preserved stories involves a goat getting into trouble, or a merchant. There's also a Chinese herbalist who moonlights as a... You ask him how long the trip will take. He says, that depends on your feet and your soul. Not hopeful, but poetic. Then there's the spice trader from India who carries a flute he doesn't know how to play. He insists say she as learning. Very slowly he adds, she has been saying that for 3 years. Sometimes, when Miral dips too low, someone shifts the flute in his hands and demands a tune. He obliges. It sounds like a goose caught in a bagpipe fair. But hey, it's some... You start to realize each caravan has its own rhythm, its own cast of characters, and more importantly, its own methods of surviving the yawning out. One favorite pastime. Ridiculous debate. Today's topic. If you could only bring one item on a desert journey besides water, what would it? The winning answer is an extra pair of socks. Second place goes to a mirror to see how bad I look. Third place, weirdly, is a live goose for emotional support. Historians rarely record this kind of story. You read ancient scrolls and it's all about taxes, treaties, and trade routes. Not once do they mention that 9 out of 10 travelers eventually snap and start talking to their camel like it's a co-minus work. No, Jamal. I said left it. Honestly, there's one traveler who really stands out, a woman from Knee Shaper who tells stories backward. Not the sentences, just the structure. She starts with end, that's why you never steal from a Soji widow, and works her way up to the beginning. You try to follow, you fail, but it's oddly soothing. And then there's you. You begin making mental note. The way the desert light hits the dunes, the slow sway of the camel's neck, that one guy who sneezes so dramatically you start to narrate your own journey in your head like you're already telling it to someone else. Maybe it's the boredom. Maybe it's your inner performer. Maybe you're just finally cracked. But for the first time, you're not just surviving the slowness, you're leaning into it. A modern historian once suggested that the Silk Road wasn't a literal road at all, but an idea, a flowing network of moments, pauses, and shared time. That sounds profound. You still call it the world's longest scenic detour with optional sandstorm. Still, you're beginning to see why people kept coming back. Boredom and all. You smell it before you see it: smoke, spice, and something suspiciously like overcooked mutton. Your stomach quakes up faster than the rest of you and makes a diplomatic request. It turns out your caravan has made it to one of the most anticipated waypoints on this part of the Silk Road, Samarkand, a city so legendary. It has entire myths devoted to how blue its tiles are. But honestly, you're more interested in the food. You stumble into a roadside in a rectangular mud minus brick building with a crooked wooden sign angling in the wind. Inside, it's lively, loud, and gloriously chaotic. Merchants argue over prices. Translators play charades across languages. And in the corner is that aloof duel. You're barely 2 steps in when someone shoves a bowl into your hand. Eat, they say. You eat. It's hot, salty, spicy, and confusing. Lamb, camel? You decide not to ask. Here's something the scrolls never tell you. Ancient inns were the social media of the Silk Road. Rumors traveled faster through a bowl of soup than through official courier. Someone mentions a new shortcut through the mountain. Someone else swears they saw omen coins in a Kashgar market. And, most importantly, someone is holding court at a table, asking loudly herbs and lamps. And just like that, you're in it. The Great Silk Road food. A group of traders from different regions have gathered, all arguing over what spices belong in what dishes. Cinnamon is apparently only for desserts, except in Persia where it's obviously meat minus compatible. Coriander is beloved in India, suspicious in the steppes, and the subject of philosophical inquiry in Byzantium. You try to, you nod wise, you say fake things like it's all about balance, but then someone asks if garlic belongs in dumplings, and suddenly your deeply minus held culinary opinions surface like ancient sea. One scholar at the table claims HES writing a treatise called the Gastronomic Silk Thread. He says cuisine is the truest marker of cultural exchange. He also says nutmeg was once considered an aphrodisiac, and that someone in his last caravan tried to. No one questions him. He wears glasses. That's always suspiciously convincing. Then a man from Bactria stands up with great ceremony and unwraps dried yogurt. This, he declares, is the future of travel food. You chew it. It tastes like regret and minerals. A so GDIN cook offers you a mist. You suspect it's just goat with fancy branding. You smile and eat it anyway. You learn something that night calling him is a real threat on the Silk Road. And people have been combating it for centuries with salt, spices, and occasionally lying about. You also learn that the word PLOV can start fights if you pronounce it wrong. And then comes the real entertainment. One of the innkeepers is also an amateur dramatist. He performs a 1- man play loosely based on the romance of the Western Chamber, but with all the main characters replaced by. You're not sure if this is satire, or performance art, or just what boredom looks like when it. There's real laughter. Some of it might be the fermented yogurt kicking in. Modern historians often focus on what goods passed through the Silk Road, silk, spices, gems, but they rarely ask what people tasted, or how that shaped their memories. In your case, you're pretty sure you'll never forget this. To that may or may not have included pine needles. As the evening winds down, someone hands you a cup of fermented mare's milk and toasts to good travel and even better gossip. You sip it. It's fizzy, alarmingly fizzy, but you smile anyway, because boredom tonight has been replaced, at least temporarily, with flavors, laughter, and a debate about dumplings. You wake up with a spoon in your boot, and absolutely no memory of how it got. Around you, the inn is slowly returning to order, or at least someone is sweeping dust onto the floor first. A chicken hops across a sleeping merchant's stomach. Life moves on. Back outside, the road beckons it, but you're not joining just. This stop has something worth investigating, a local relay station. Officially, it's a trade post. Unofficially, it's the ancient world's equivalent of a backstage lounge where stories, secrets, and suspicious puppetry all come together. Yes, puppetry. You follow the sound of clattering wooden exaggerated gasps. to a small tent pit. A faded banner flutters above the entrance theater of silk string. Inside, about a dozen travelers are huddled on rugs. Eyes wide as a paper minus matched Iger menaces a wooden monk. A kid tugs at your sleeve and whispers. This is the third time the monk died. It's tradition, turns out. Every major caravan stop has its own rotating cast of performers, puppeteers, dancers, storytellers, and sometimes jugglers who are clearly just bad at selling fit. It's not glamorous, but it's something, and that's all you need out here. You sit down, the monk eyes again, the performer, a weary man with a dramatic mustache and the energy of someone who once tried to tame a peacock, gives a bow so deep it seems medically unwise. Then he begins the next tale this time. It's about a heroic noodle maker who saves a town from boredom with a particularly spicy recipe. Is it historically accurate? Not even a little, but as if you chat with the performer afterward. His name is Kava, and he claims his family has been touring the circuits since the year the moon disappeared for 3 days, which is either poetic or completely made up. He says HE's seen more than camels, and caravan chefs seen people on board themselves. They invent, he says, sipping. You think this puppet is old? My grandfather made it with the broken sandal and goat bones, because he ran out of things to do, and boredom is louder than hunger. You ask if he nods, or I, just either way, it's good. Later that day, you explore the rest of the post. There's a letter scribe who offers to compose passive minus aggressive poetry for your ex minus partners. I specialize in emotional ambiguity, Hebrew. There's a dice game you're pretty sure is just gambling dressed as cultural exchange. And there's a man selling a authentic silk that looks suspiciously like dyed wool, but he makes up for it with excellent puns. The air smells of ink and fried dough. And for a moment, you forget that you're thousands of miles from home, halfway between ambition and ankle pain. Academics often say the Silk Road was about trade, diplomacy, religion, but they rarely mention the way people built temporary fame for a single day at a trade post. Someone could be the most interesting person in the world until the next caravan showed up. Here, reputation is portable. Like a puppet, like a song, like this, you start to realize boredom on the Silk Road doesn't get defeated by grand event. It gets nibbled away by oddity, by a stranger's joke, a cup of questionable tea, a dog wearing a hat, which you definitely just saw and will not question. As the sun dips low, a traveler nearby begins strumming everyone gathers again. There's no script, no agenda, just shared time. You lie back on the rug, watching shadows stretch like yawns across the wall of the tent. No monk dies this time, but a cucumber becomes king. It's a good ending. You're half minus asleep on the back of a camel when a voice beside you whispers, do you want to know your future? Naturally, you say yes, because one, you're curious, and two, you do anything to break the hypnotic rhythm of thunk minus thunk from the camels. Also, the man asking has absolutely nailed the mysterious minus, cloak minus, and minus pointy minus beard. It's hard to say no to someone who looks like a wizard cosplaying as a tax collector. His name is Dima, and he introduces himself as a traveling astromancer, not to be confused with an astronomer, or astrologer or magician. It's all three, he insists, plus a little accounting. You slide off your camel for a break, stretch your legs, and follow him to a makeshift stall set up under a fake tree that looks like it gave up fruit production for a life of shady gossip. Dima lays out a collection of tool sticks, stones, shells, and what might be a fossilized drape. The Silk Road, he says, His more than paths is a timeline, and right now you're e-walking yours. He casts the shell. They land in a vaguely circular shape. Ah, yes, he says, nodding solemnly. You're going to meet a large bird soon. Like metaphorically, no just a bird, possibly aggressive. You're about to laugh when a merchant nearby yelps. As a hawk swoops down and steals his dried fruit, you look back at Dima. He just sips his tea smug. Turns out, Dima's stall is popular with travelers desperate for a change in mental scenery. Some come for romance predictions, others for business prospect. One guy asks if he'll ever outrun his debt. Dima looks at the man's palms, then at the man's camel, and simply says no. But the best part? She as a fabulous gossip. Apparently, a Persian envoy tried to propose marriage to a Soji Di and translator Vi, uploaded poems only to discover the translator was actually 5 different people taking romance is tricky on the road. Dima shrugged. It's just not wrong. You overhear more stories, some touching, some strange, some deeply confusing. One traveler believes rubbing onions on your feet prevents nightmares. Another swears by carrying a rock named Dennis for good luck. A third is convinced that singing to his water skins keeps them cooler. Historians often focus on tangible artifacts, coins, scrolls, textiles. But what they miss is the invisible cargo superstitions. Jokes, half-minus true tales passed like handshakes from one bored traveler to another. You decide to give this fortune thing a shot. Dima asks you to close your eyes. Breathe in deeply and think of one question. You think, will I ever stop feeling sand in my sock? He throws down the one lands perfectly hit right. That means yes, he said. Then, after a pause in about 6 months, you sigh. Not ideal, he smiled. But boredom will leave sooner than sin does. You don't know if that's wisdom or a Team Ines shirt slogan, but you appreciate it. As the day wears on, you hang around his stall longer than you planned. You help sort pebbles by spiritual density, which seems mostly subjective. You trade a half-minus burned candle for a charm shaped like a humming camel. You even write a poem on a rice scroll. All road so dry, my feet protest. I miss my bed, my socks, my red. Yet here I walk and here I stall, because somehow I've missed it all. You show it to Dima. He says it has potential. You choose to take that as a compliment. By evening, the stars are blinking overhead, and Dima's already packing. You'll dream tonight, he tells you, of goats balancing on wall. That's oddly specific. You nod. Thanks. He winks. Thank the road. It brought you here. You return to your camel, who looks unimpressed by your foray into... But you feel lighter somehow, because even if your future is uncertain, your present just got a lot less boring. Somewhere between, I think my camel just sneezed and what day is it again? You're going to write a letter, not because you have something particularly urgent to say, but because writing gives your brain something to chew on beside. Also, it seems like a very Silk Road thing to do, scribbling something philosophical with a cracked reed pen while squinting into the sun. You dig through your pack and find your writing kit, a folded sheet of parchment, a tiny ink pot, and a brush that's seen better centuries. You settle by a rock, prop the paper on your knee, and begin. Dear, you pause. Who exactly are you writing to? The friend back home? A younger version of yourself? A fictional twin who made better life choices and stayed in Luwaring running a tofu You settle on dear whoever is less dusty than I am, and go from there. The ink dries slowly. The sentences come slowly. The flies, however, are extremely fast. One lands right on the word camel and promptly dies. You consider that symbolic. Despite the challenges, it's oddly soothing. You describe the dunes. The sound of hooves. The spice debates, the weirdly prophetic fortune, my mysterious case of the spoon in your boob. You even sketch your camel. It looks more like a hairy gourd, but you're proud of it. You're not the only one writing. Around you, others pull out scrolls, bark minus paper, silk scraps. A few dictate to professional scribes traveling with the caravan. These guys are like the celebrity ghostwriters of the road. They charge per metaphor and frown. If your emotions are too generic, you overhear one scribe say, "Sir, I cannot compare your wife's voice to honey and thunder. Pick one." Letters from the Silk Road are famous among historians, but mostly because of the logistics. The real magic is that they existed at all. Paper traveled thousands of miles. Ink was made from burnt peach, pits and dog's bile, and mail delivery. Let's just say it was interpretive. Some letters took months, some took years, some never arrived at all and were found in desert caves centuries later, covered in bat guano and romantic regret. You learn there's a whole system of postal relays, government messengers on horseback, merchants who moonlight as mailmen. One guy swears he saw a pigeon deliveral of note to a garrison outpost. Another guy claims his cousin used a falcon. The falcon never came back. The cousin married someone else. Still, everyone writes, because writing gives shape to the otherwise formless days. It creates little anchors in the shifting dust, and it makes you feel, even just a little, like you're more than a moving dot on someone else's trade map. Of course, not all letters are serious. You stumble across a poem someone left behind on a rock. If you find this, I've gone to pee, or to find out what bit my knee. Take my camel. She knows the way. She also sings, but only at you chuckle. It's no worse than your camel drawing. By the time the sun starts to dip, your ink has run out. Your parchment is full, and your back is developing what scholars would call scroll posture. But you feel satisfied. You tie up the letter with a strip of cloth, hand it to a courier who looks mildly sober, and hope for that maybe it will arrive. Maybe it will. Maybe someday a curious archaeologist will read it and wonder whoever is less dust, and maybe they'll smile. You're staring at a rock. It's not even a particularly impressive rock, just a rock. But after weeks on the Silk Road, your brain has recalibrated its excitement threshold. This one looks vaguely like a sleepy elephant. That's worth at least 10 seconds of entertainment. Then a voice beside you says, "Did you know silk doesn't create?" You turn to see a man in bright robes, a peacock feather behind his ear, and a scroll sticking awkwardly out of his belt like he sat. His name is Liu, and apparently a chi as a collector of fact, not object, not currency, just facts. Silk, he repeats, generate, unlike wool. That's why Han courtiers preferred it during dry winter. Less shocking. You blink. He smiles. This is how your day begins, with what can only be described as a walking trivia app in human form. Liu claims HE as compiling a scroll called the Illustrated Collection of Caravan Curiosity. You suspect it's just a long list of sentences that start with "Did you know?" Still, you're intrigued. As the caravan rolls forward, Liu walks beside you, dropping his "Did you know Roman coins have been found in Vietnam? Did you know some camels have names passed down for generations? Did you know cinnamon used to be more valuable than silver?" You ask if all these are true. He nods solemnly and says, "The world is strange. I simply keep You pass the time trading your own collection of questionable facts, like the guy who swears eating roasted garlic keeps bandits away, or the rumor that the Emperor of Byzantium once banned onions because they made his dreams. Lewis, he writes these down as unverified but charming. The two of you end up inventing each hour. You challenge each other to produce the weirdest is true fact from the cultures you've passed through. Liu in one cushion village. Locals believe yawning at dawn brings bad harp. You in my caravan? We believe eating figs while walking attracts camel. Liu, that's not a belief. That's just cause and effect. You still count. At a rest stop. Liu shows you his scroll in progress. It's filled with doodles, marginal notes, and color minus coded symbols that only he understands. You spot an entire page devoted to ancient toothbrush methods, including a terrifying diagram involving a... You ask why he bothers collecting these. He shrugged. Because the big things, wars, kings, prices, they all get written down. But these tiny oddities, they vanish unless someone bothered. Historians today still argue about how cultural exchange actually worked on the Silk Road. Was it deliberate? Organic? Driven by politics, trade, love? Liu has a simpler theory: people are bored, so they talk, and when they talk, things travel. He has a point. You think about how many bits of information you've absorbed already on this trip: how to fold a tent in wind, how not to offend a Persian spice merchant, never question their cinnamon, and how to tell if a camel is... These things aren't an official record, but they live in jokes, inside comments, in the things people repeat when the sun is too hot and the road too long. That night, Liu gives you a tiny scroll fragment with a drawing of a camel wearing sunglasses. For memory, he said, of how you survived boredom with style. You laugh. He insists it's a serious historical doc. You don't argue, because deep down, you suspect it. You've officially forgotten what day it could be Thursday. It could be the 15th of January. All you know is that your socks are now 2 different colors. And the camel ahead of you has been walking into aches for 20 minutes. Maybe it's a new trend. Just as your brain starts sliding into a deep, dust minus induced nap, something extraordinary happens. Someone laughs. Not just any laugh. A sigh. Belling bass clutching laugh that makes camels blink and pigeons fly off in protest. You turn to see a small group gathered around a cooking pot, pointing at someone who just tried and failed to explain a joke in 4 different languages. Welcome to the unofficial Silk Road language games. You wander over, curiosity piqued. What begins as polite eavesdropping quickly turns into full participation when someone hands you a bowl of tea and says, "Okay, your turn. Try this sentence in So-G-D-I-N." You hesitate. "I don't speak So-G-D-I-N." "Neither do we," someone says cheerfully. That's what makes it fun. The rules of the game are simple: one person says a sentence in their language, and everyone else tries to. Bonus points for wildly incorrect guesses. Points are not tracked. No one wins, which makes it perfect for the Silk Road. You're in a mixed group: Chinese, Persian, So-G-D-I-N, Turkic, and someone who might be Greek but speaks with a French accent for dramatic flair. It's chaos, beautiful multilingual chaos. A Chinese herbalist says, the Persian guesses, a bird with 5 livers flies only at the grief in this. You explained that it means the sparrow may be small, but it has all the organs, or basically, don't underestimate small things. Everyone nods, impressed. Then someone mutters. You go another round. A woman from Samarkand gives a long phrase that includes 5 syllables you're pretty sure are sneezes. Your guess? Never trust a goat with an opinion. It's actually, the market speaks louder than the merchant. Still, your version gets more laugh. As the day stretches on, the game becomes less about accuracy and more about imagination. Someone invents a language on the spot. Someone else tries to explain sarcasm using only facial expressions under rock. There's something magical about watching people from completely different backgrounds laugh at the same absurd mistress. It's like linguists. You even witness an unexpected love story: a translator and a cook trying to teach each other swear words in respectful whisper. You suspect it's less about vocabulary and more about shared smiles. Historians still debate how language barriers were overcome on the Silk Road. Pitch in dialects, visual symbols, universal gestures. Truth is, they probably used whatever worked: sign language, song flattery, wildly optimistic pointing, or like you, they leaned into the of it all. Someone pulls out a lute and strums the word hello in 5 rhythms. Someone else claps the syllables of I need a nap. Suddenly, the game turns musical. And soon the whole group is trying to translate emotions into... It's terrible and hilarious and somehow perfect. You realize the real power of the Silk Road was just the moment when someone says something utterly baffling, and instead of frustration, everyone bursts. By sunset, your face hurt, your tea has gone cold, and your brain, oddly enough, feels refreshed not from rest, but from playful chaos. You lie back and listen to the echoes of languages mixing in the dusk, and you think boredom doesn't stand a chance when confusion is this entertaining. Your camel is, well, not actually sparkling, but she has shiny beads braided into her, and her saddle is freshly polished. And someone has tied a small banner to her tail that reads you glance around and realize you've wandered into the middle of a full minus blown fest. Not a huge one. Mind you, there are no grand parades or firewood. Music twanges from a 3- string instrument that looks suspiciously like it was made from a soup ladle. Smoke from food fires curls into the sky. Children dart between tents wearing headbands made from dried reed, and in the center of it all is a camel beauty contest. Yes, this is real. Apparently, you've arrived just in time for what the locals call the annual Desert Elegance Show. It's part pageant, part parade, part well. No one's exactly sure what the rest is, but everyone agrees. You sit on a mat and sip date milk as a commentator yells something unintelligible. A procession of camels CLOMP past, each decorated in unique flare gold tassels. Henna minus dyed humps embroidered her caps. One even has little shoe. You're not kidding. The owners walk proudly beside. You glance over at your camel. She glares at you, clearly expecting a makeover. You tie a silk ribbon to her halter and whisper, "Don't get used. The festival isn't just..." There's music, dancing, and impromptu wrestling match. One man insists he can balance a water pod on his head while solving riddles. He can, but the attempt is impressive. Children compete in a game where they try to race with clay pots on their back. The pots don't survive. Laughter does. Then there's the main attraction, the desert walk minus off. Camels are led one by one across a soft patch of sand, while judges rate their poise, step flair, and overall aura. You hear murmurs like very elegant stride, and that one turned its head with intent. You're 90% sure no one knows the criteria. Your camel is called up. She pauses, snorts, and walks the path like she's been waiting her whole life for this moment. She adds a subtle hip sway. Someone gasps. The crowd erupts in polite applause. She wins 3rd place and a decorative nose bell. She looks smug for the rest as the sun sets. The celebration. Someone brings out a hand drum. A woman sings a lullaby in a language you don't understand, but it feels like warm honey. You sit around the fire, listening to people trade festival memories. Who wore what? Which camel once refused to walk until fed 7 feet? A scholar nearby murmurs that these kinds of gatherings were common all along the Silk Road, small local festive, and that they served a purpose, not just rest and trade, but morale, a reset button for the spirit. Historians argue about the logistics of these. How were they organized? How did word spread? Were they spontaneous or planned? The answer likely is both, because when enough people get tired of sand and silence, Someone always finds a way to make noise. That night, you fall asleep to the faint jingle of camel bells and the rhythm of disc. For once, the desert doesn't feel endless. It feels alive. You dream that your camel accepts an award for best attitude. She makes a speech. It's moving. You wake up smiling. The sun's not even up yet. And you're already elbow minus deep in a teacup. You didn't plan it this way. You just asked a friendly minus looking man at the bazaar if there was a quiet spot to sit. And 5 minutes later, you're on a bamboo mat in a tea house that smells like ancient furniture and mild excess. The man pours your tea with reverence, then slides a bowl of roasted chickpeas your way like he as passing us. You nod solemnly. He nods solemnly. Everyone here seems very solemn until the storytelling begins. A hunched man with a beard like an ink spill claps his hands twice. The room hushes. He clears his throat. So, he says, let me tell you how Emperor Wu tried and failed 12 times to stop snacking and just like that, you're in the middle of a tea house still mine is. Apparently, this is a regular thing in Kashgar. Every evening and sometimes mornings when the tea is strong, locals gather in these cozy, shadowy corners to trade stories, gossip, and mildly exaggerated imperial biography. You sip your tea. It tastes of cinnamon and roasted barley, comforting, if a little like warm library. The storyteller continued. On the third night, the emperor's servants replaced his midnight dumplings with. The results were diplomatically catastrophic. The audience chuckled. One woman shakes her head and mutters, turnips, always a mistake. The best part? The stories are half true, half theater, and completely soothing. You hear tales of generals who got lost trying to find the royal bat, of empresses who held poetry contests for their pet turtles, of ministers. One storyteller performs an entire saga using only facial expressions and a fan. You're not sure what the story was about, but you feel emotionally changed. You learn there's an entire underground network of these storytellers, travelers, and locals alike who pass stories along the Silk Road like heirloom. Some tales strike, others are born the moment someone misplaces a shoe. Modern historians rarely credit these oral to slippery, to mutable, but you're starting to believe that some of the most important records were never written down at all. They were told with raised eyebrows. You even meet a young girl named Nilafar who proudly declares chess training to be a story. Her favorite topic? All the times Genghis Khan almost fell off his horse. You ask if those stories are true. She grins. Probably not. But they're good for listening. A nearby scholar leans in and tells you. The Persian word hikayat means tale but also lesson. He sips his tea. But sometimes the lesson is just don't climb walls during a sam. Outside, the city is bustling spices, fabrics, camels making unreasonable noises, but inside the tea house, time moves like it's been steeped, filtered, and gently poured into ceramic cups. You stay for hours. Someone brings out a drum. Someone else hums. An old man swears he once saw a dragon in the mountains but couldn't prove it because it was shy. And in this gentle absurdity, the boredom you woke up with dissolves into warm laughter and shared silence. You leave the tea house with a story in your pocket and a slightly singed tongue. Later by the fire, you try to retell one of the tales to a fellow traveler. You forget half of it. Misquote. Invent. They laugh anyway. Because on the Silk Road, sometimes it's not about the story itself, but the voice. You're sitting on a wooden crate, staring at a chessboard that's older than your camel and probably twice as stubborn. The game's called NIFZ, a variant you've never heard of before somewhere between chess, checkers, and exist. The rules are mostly oral tradition, partially made minus up, and completely inconsistent between players. Perfect for the Silk Road. Your opponent is a boy no older than 11, wearing a headscarf, too big for his head and a smirk far too confident for someone who just told you pawns can move in circles if you're already losing. The board sits on an overturned barrel in the middle of a caravan camp. Around you, traders, guards, and various professional loiterers gather to watch. Most are not here for the game, they're here to see if you'll snap after your knight gets captured by what may or may not be an upside minus down rook. Don't worry. The boy says cheerfully, you're better than the last guy. You ask, how long did he last? The boy grinned. He cried. In a way, it makes sense. Games like these strange hybrids, improvised rules passed down and morphed across generations, are part of how travelers along the Silk Road kept their brains from turning into boiled millet, especially during long stops, sandstorms, or post-minus meals to Perez. The camp has a whole culture of these little diversions, dice games using stones, storytelling contests judged by applause, and one extremely suspicious competition involving balancing figs on your head while reciting poetry. You watch a group of guards trying to teach a horse to identify playing cards. The horse is either uninterested or incredibly strategic. One old trader offers to show you the original version of backgammon, which apparently involves to extrude ice and a chant that you decline with respect. Back at your game, the boy announces your camel piece is now in jail. You stare at him. Since when are there jails? He shrugs. Since now. You sigh and move your only remaining piece a bishop equivalent diagonally backward. He immediately declares a double reversal by Dune law and wins the game. You hand over your wager, a dried apricot, and every shiny button. He accepts it like it's gold, bows, and invites you for a rematch when the moon looks judgmental again. What's striking isn't just the creativity, it's the seriousness. These games are treated with the kind of reverence usually reserved for military strategy or poetry duel. People argue over rules like they were handed down by divine camel. A traveler next to you notes, games are like mirror. They show what people care about. You nod, then add in what they're willing to cheat about. Historians have found fragments of game boards in Silk Road ruins, often carved from bone or wood, but the rules gone, lost to wind, time, and 11 minus year minus old. Still, you begin to understand in a place where days blur together, and the horizon never changes. Games are more than game. They're anchors, rituals, a shared language, and sometimes they're just a really good excuse to not dig another camel trend. Later that night, you overhear two merchants arguing whether yelling checkmate louder makes it more valid. You decide not to get involved. Instead, you lie down beside your fire, replaying the game in your head. You still have no idea what happened, but you smile anyway, because for an hour, boredom had to wait. You're trying to keep a low profile. You really are. But somehow, you've been roped into a dance performance. It starts innocently. A group of travelers sets up camp earlier than usual. Someone brings out a drum. Someone else claps a rhythm. And before long, there's music. Good music, catchy, toe minus tapping, shoulder minus wiggly music that makes you momentarily forget you haven't showered in for countries. Then someone asks if you know the Sochi Dian spin. You don't. You say this clearly, loudly, even, which, apparently, is all the encouragement they need. Within minutes, you're in the middle of a circle of laughing dancers, trying to imitate a series of steps that seem to defy physics. Ankle flexibility, and your current hydration level. Everyone else makes it look graceful, especially the older woman with a walking stick who is absolutely out-dancing you. The steps aren't complicated, a few turns, a shoulder shrug, a strange movement that may or may not be an intentional trip, But when you try it, it looks like your limbs are eaten. You hear someone whisper, "Is this interpretive?" Someone else replies, The dance, if you can call it, that is part of an old Sojidi and tradition. A mix of ritual, entertainment, and competitive side minus eyes. Each region along the Silk Road has its own variation, often blending local rhythms with borrowed steps from traders, soldiers, and wandering musicians. And because boredom is a universal motivator, most of these dances include some sort of audience participation rule that absolutely no one warns you about until tonight the theme is desert animal. A boy flaps his arms like a merchant shuffles like a turtle carrying tea. One particularly enthusiastic. It's unsettling, but you applaud. When it's your turn, someone shouts, "Be a lizard." So you try. You don't become a lizard so much as resemble someone mid-minus cramp who's also dodging beat. But it gets a laugh, especially from the scorpion and that. By the time the final drumbeat hits, your face hurts from grinning and your legs have declared diplomatic neutrality. You collapse on a cushion, breathless and slightly proud. A dancer sits beside you and says, "You moved like someone trying to remember a dream." You take it as a compliment, later over sweetened tea and rice cakes. The conversation turns reflect. Someone asks why it ends at all. Out here in the middle of nowhere, a quiet voice replies, "Because we still have bodies, and they get bored too." You learn that many of these dances have meaning, some religious, some historical, some just passed down because they made someone's great-minus grandmother smile. The steps are often improvised, changed, forgotten, then rediscovered. Historians still debate the cultural origins of these hybrid Silk Road performances. Were they imported? Invented? Spontaneous acts of shared rhythm? The answer is probably yes, all of the above. But for now, in the soft firelight, it doesn't matter. Someone begins to hum. Others join. Rises, unspoken but felt. And you find yourself tapping along, not quite ready. Your camel watches from a distance, unimpressed. But you're beginning to understand how movement can silence the noise in your head, how even the left feet can find their place in this, and how sometimes the road is danced through, not just walked. You never expected to perform poetry in the middle of it, yet here you are, standing beside a flickering campfire, clutching a palm-sized scroll like it's a magical amulet, and about to recite a poem you just wrote on the back of a dried fruit wrapper. The moon is out, the wind is behaving, and the audience made up of traders, camel handlers, and one sheep with highly judgmental eyes is unusually quiet. Welcome to the caravan's nightly poet research. You didn't plan to participate. You were just going to watch. Maybe clap politely, then slink off to bed and pretend you understood all the metaphor. But when someone asks if anyone else has something to share, a dozen heads turn all towards you. You try to protest. "I'm not a poet," you say. So GD, and woman replies, "Neither is anyone here. That's why." So you take a breath, clear your throat, and begin. "My feet are dusty. My socks are worse. My camel sighs like chest lifting a curse. The stars are bright, but I miss my bed, and I swear I just saw a cactus with a drip." A pause, then laughter, applaud. The sheep blinks once in approval. You sit down, flushed but oddly exhilarated. This is what you've stumbled into tonight, an impromptu open mic. The Silk Road version of a late-minus night cafe reading. Some poems are serious. Some are silly, some are clearly metaphors for food cravings disguised. A Persian man reads a verse comparing his ex-wife to a sandstorm. Everyone murmurs respectfully. A child recites a line ode to his favorite dried apricot. Everyone cheered. Then there's a Kirghiz herder who performs a poem entirely through humming and eyebrow movement. It's a faun to minus guard, possibly cursed, but memorable. These aren't polished work. No one's expecting meter perfection or elegant henge ambient. This is poetry as released, as story, as a way to reclaim a little space inside the vastness of the journey. The traveling monk beside you explains. In some regions, this was tradition every caravan had at least one poem night per moon cycle. It kept minds limber, spirits lifted. He takes a sip of fermented tea and adds. And sometimes, it helped travelers flirt. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugged. I once saw a man win a proposal. With a haiku about sheep maintenance, you learn that some poems are meant to be passed along like traveling verses, updated by each person who hears. One begins with, "The road is long, but my sock," and by the end of the night, it's become an 8- stanza epic involving wind, love, regret, and the misplaced fig incident from tonight. Historians rarely talk about poetry on the Silk Road. When they do, it's usually the refined stuff royal court verses, religious, but this is poetry of the people, the tired, the sunburned, the mildly lost. You realize that writing even badly is a kind of math, a way to make sense of where you are, even if it's just somewhere past that really weird shaped trough. Later that night, a storyteller whispers that in certain oases, they bury poems beneath stones as offerings to the road. You ask, do they think the road listens? He shrugs. I think they just want to be heard. Before you sleep, you fold your little fruit wrapper poem and place it under your blanket, not as an offering, just as something to carry forward, because somewhere between exhaustion and expression, you've found something to hold on to. You're sitting behind a stack of saddlebags, flicking pebbles at a cup with an intensity that suggests this is the most important competition of your life, because right now it is. Welcome to Wind Minus and Toss, the unofficial sport of the perpetually bored Silk Road trap. You and a few caravan companions invented it yesterday, right after lunch, which may explain why the rules are vague and constantly changing. Current version: toss a pebble into a cup from a distance of 4 camel hooves, unless the wind shifts, in which case you're allowed 1 bounce. Unless the cup tips, then you get 2 bounces, and if a dog walks across the play area, all scores reset. It's not a perfect game, but it beats staring at your camel's tail for 3 hours. Across from you is your main rival, a sleepy mine, a side spice merchant named. He has the aim of a monk and the swagger of someone who once convinced a caravan that cardamom. Ready? He said. You nod. You toss. The pebble sails. It bounces once, twice, hits the rim and groans echo. Dario smirks. You swear your camel side. The game is silly, pointless, and oddly symbolic. You and your fellow travelers have begun inventing more games. There's blanket chess where the pieces arm is matched, buttons and pebbles, desert dice, which is trolling beetles into making predictions, and guess that smell self-explanatory, rarely a good idea. It's not just fun, it's survival. A merchant nearby watches your tournament and mutters, humans were not built to walk this much without entertainment. You agree. Later, a young girl with stained hands proposes a new rule. If you make the shot, you have to tell a lie disguised as if you hit the cup. She nods expectantly. You say, the Emperor of Tang once challenged a goose to he lost. She grins. Sounds true enough. What begins as a game quickly becomes a storytelling free minus for minus all. Each successful toss now comes with someone claims the Great Wall was originally built to keep out musical instruments. Another insists camels only hum when emotionally fulfilled. A third says silk can be used to catch ghosts if soaked in goat milk. Are any of these true? Probably not. Will someone write them down and claim they heard it from a wise man in the mountains? Almost definitely. One of the oldest travelers, an archer with a voice like Gravelindle F like thunder, says, "Games are how we remember we're alive." He then misses his toss and blames wind betrayal. Modern historians often overlook the role of play on the Silk Road. They focus on economics, politics, conflict resolution. But here, amidst the dust and distances, it's clear games were crucial, not just humor, human mindedness. Even in ancient travel logs, there are faint hints. A note about an odd tossing pastime among the caravan. A side remark spirits, lifted after the elders allowed. You wonder how many of these games vanished without ever being written down, lost to wind, sand, and the selective memory of time. So you write your own rules on a scrap of just in case some future traveler finds it and wonders what bored people used to. As the sun dips low, someone calls out, double or no. You nod, wind a pebble in your fingers, and toss it misses. Everyone cheers anyway, because somehow you're all winning. You're on the road again, shocking. Yes, and something's changed. Not the desert, that's still doing its endless impersonation of a giant spilled bag of cowsket. Look, Shess, still giving you that look. Like you owe her rent. No. What's changed is you. You no longer hate the silence. In fact, you kind of like it. It started a few days ago. Somewhere between the 15th game of blanket chess and your questionable performance in the Camel Impression Poetry Slam, you realized your mind had gone quiet. Not bored, just still. You begin to notice things you missed before. The way the sand shifts in tiny waves when the wind whispered, how the caravan bells ring at slightly different pitches, like an accidental melody. The long pause people take before answering, not because they're unsure, but because the road you've become attuned to boredom, not in resistance to it, but in rhythm with. A trader beside you chuckles as you watch a beetle walk. You've gone full caravan monk, he said. Next, you'll be naming rock. You point to a smooth, round one near your foot. That's howlin'. Achias emotionally available. You both laugh. There's a strange wisdom that seeps into your bones when you've walked this long. The world slows down, and in slowing opens, you start to remember things, childhood dreams, unfinished conversations, old friends' birth, all unearthed by sand and silence. And then it hits you, you're on your way home. You'd almost forgotten that was the point, not just to go, but to return wiser, weirder, possibly sunburned in new places. You pass familiar markers now. That angry minus looking boulder shaped like a horse with a seat. That cactus that hosted an impromptu shadow puppet. That spot where someone's shoe exploded from heat and mild sarcasm. It's like walking through your own myth. One dust. A younger traveler asks, was it worth? You don't even pause. Every boring step. She blinks. But weren't you bored out of your skull? Yes, you say, smiling, repeatedly. But I met a man who predicted bird. I danced like a lizard. I survived 5 versions of chess and learned silk docent mix. You think for a moment, then add, I also discovered dim terrible at poetry. Then mildly allergic to date wine. She nods solemnly. That does sounding writ. Your back feels like it's auditioning for a tragic opera. But inside, there's a calm you didn't expect. Because here's the thing, no map will tell you the Silk Road doesn't just carry goods. It carries people, laughter, and a million weird, wonderful ways to survive boredom with grace, grit, and questionable dice rule. You make it to the last camp before home. Someone offers you, someone else tries. You accept both. And as you sit, you think about the road behind you not as a line, but as a loop, a rhythm. The slow, ridiculous dance with sand as the soundtrack. Tomorrow you'll arrive, unpacked, tell your misremember half of them in the most charming way possible. But tonight, you're just one more dusty traveler lying under unfamiliar stars, waiting for the camel. Word count 1091. Final section complete. Generating closing passage. Final soothing passage. Wind minus down ending. 300 word. And now, dear traveler, your journey is complete. You've crossed deserts without losing your humor. You've befriended camels. Danced like no one was judging, even though everyone was. And discovered that boredom, when stretched long enough, turns into something quietly beautiful. You've heard poetry whispered over tea, played games with rules no one remembered, and found stories hidden in the silence between footsteps. Somewhere along the way, you've stopped resisting the slowness and started flowing with. Now, let the dust settle. There's no more road to walk, no more camel bells, no more fig minus based wagers. No need to remember whether it's Tuesday or's, and you read the 5th, just the hush of night, and the gentle weight of your eyelid. Picture yourself beneath a wide, endless sky. The stars are flickering like candlelight in the distance. A cool breeze rustles your blanket. Someone nearby hums a tune with no name. And in the background, the soft snoring of a caravan, camels included. You're safe. You're east. You've made it all the way across. Breathe in. Let the journey melt into dream. Let the road disappear behind you. Like footprints the wind will soon tuck away. You don't need to remember everything, just that. For a little while, you were part of something old, slow, and quietly magnificent. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what you needed. And now everything slows. The wind has settled. The sand no longer drifts. Even that grumpy minus looking camel has finally folded its legs and gone quiet. You lie beneath the night sky, the ground still holding a trace of warmth beneath your back. The only sound is the soft crackle of a dying fire, like ancient whispers curling through the air. The road you walked begins to fade from your mind, like footsteps being gently swept away by the wind. The strange chess games, the dances, the ridiculous poems, the maybe minus true predictions, they haven't vanished. They're simply tucking themselves into your dreams. You begin to understand this journey was never about the destination. It was about these quiet, absurd, and unexpectedly tender moments along the way. The kind that teach you, without a single word, that slowing down is a form of a ride. Close your eyes now. Tonight, there's nothing else you need to do. No decisions to make. No roads to follow. Let time move with. Let stories settle like. Let your breath soften. You're no longer in a desert. Not in a tea house. Not on a camel's back. You're somewhere quieter. Deeper in that place just before dreams begin. Where the world goes still and the stars lean close to listen. You're not alone there. You're with everyone who's ever listened to a quiet story right before sleep. So rest, traveler. The journey can wait. Good night.